In life, you might realize that there are some things that are subjectively absurd, and there are things that are objectively wrong. Let me say that again because I'm sure there are people here who disagree with me, but since I have the pulpit, I'll say whatever I want. There are things in life that are subjectively absurd and objectively wrong. There are things that we know are wrong. And talking in big strokes about the nature of the universe, the existence of God, or even about truth, I'm not even talking about ethics or morals or values. I'm not talking about perspective and wisdom. I'm talking about what is right and what is wrong. And there is a lot at stake when we make the choice in our life to live ethically. Ethics are not a discrete element of religious life, a component of the whole that can be plainly isolated and studied in itself. Ethics are interwoven into worship, into ritual, into authority, into community. My brother said to me this week, it seems as though the High Holidays is all about how bad we are and how great God is. Well, there's more to it. And as adult, living, thinking, breathing beings, we realize it's not so simple. If we take what we read seriously, then we understand that it's all interwoven and makes up a complex religious life. Ethics is a kind of piety, a sense of group, and embrace of tradition, as much as it is a guide to duty, to justice, to compassion. Let me start with one thing that really got me this year. Don't for a second think that I'm making a negative comment about space travel, because I think space travel is important. Discovery is important. But in 2021, we saw 2 billionaires race to space in what they called private space travel. They got a glimpse of what the Earth looked like from far away. In my opinion, this isn't a statement about space travel because it's important, especially so that we can keep the Jewish laser program alive. You know somebody on the internet is going to flag that. I think it's controversial because the people who went up in those spaceships, they didn't explore the galaxy. This is a comment that I make today about Bezos and Branson, and for no other reason but to throw in Musk, just because I don't like him. And he doesn't know who I am, so what? But their apparent plans to join the space race themselves. It's drastically expanded its space-based services. That's the work of Musk. Hundreds of, maybe thousands of satellites in the sky that they have launched. And they have, in my opinion, wasted tremendous amounts of money just because they can. As CNN put it back in 2021, these are supersonic joyrides. And with each accomplishment, you can almost hear the other screaming, "But what about me? Didn't you see my ship go up as well?" This summer, we saw 2 horrible tragedies. One got massive media coverage. One was almost entirely ignored. After days of desperate searches throughout the Atlantic Ocean, the U.S. Coast Guard announced Thursday that 5 passengers aboard the missing submersible vessel were killed when the vessel suffered a catastrophic implosion. And we heard their names on that Thursday. Rush and Dawood, his son Suleiman, Hamish Harding and Paul Henry Nargolet were inside that vessel that embarked on a deep dive tour. According to Ocean Gate, the company that operated the submersible, their families were notified after the debris of the vessel was found on the ocean floor, according to the Coast Guard. And then an article went on to say, our hearts are with these 5 souls and every member of their families during this tragic time. We grieve the loss of life and the joy brought to everyone they knew. Ocean Gate said that upon hearing of the tragedy. And then, of course, you know, at least I hope you do, of the second. The earliest of more than a dozen distress calls came the morning of June 13. On a boat overpacked with migrants, water had run out, and the situation was deteriorating. Yet the Greek Coast Guard did not call for a high-priority rescue operation. In subsequent hours, officials maintained the vessels were proceeding with a steady course and speed, and the people on board didn't want help. Greek officials deny any responsibility for what happened that night when the migrant boat, a fishing trawler known as the Adriana, capsized and sent 750 people into the Mediterranean Sea. You can almost hear the cries of their souls screaming out, "What about me?" So here's my theory. Once we start doing comparisons between tragedies or accomplishments, then you know what you and I do? Absolutely nothing. That's usually what happens when we start making comparisons. We let ourselves off the hook for those things that we are responsible for, or things that we should take responsibility for. When we decide there is something worse, we're lulled into a sense of complacency. Once we can come up with the next worst thing, we opt out of entirely fixing anything. The mental exercise of comparing tragedies or crimes or sins or even accomplishments seems to absolve us of the urgency to do anything. It rarely motivates us to do more. In the greatest sin in all of the Torah, the sin against which all other sins are compared, is the sin of the golden calf. Brought immediate suffering to the Jewish people. But the Talmud adds something in discussing that sin. The Talmud says, "Uviyom kudei uvkadeti alehem chatatam." The Talmud states that in every punishment that comes to the Jewish people since that time, there's a small amount of retribution that comes because of the sin of the golden calf. It's a bizarre statement. According to the Talmud, there is a cumulative effect of national sin. Sin shouldn't be compared, but understood as compounding. Sin accumulates. It gets on you and you can't get it off. We can all understand that. It's not that sin is a part of who we are, as classic anti-Semites might say. It's that the impact of sin extends beyond that moment. You might start doing that same exercise with your sins that I did earlier. Well, it wasn't so bad what I did that time. It's way better than what I did the other time. It's the impact of sin that extends beyond the moment. What's amazing about this piece of Gemara is that it comes after a series of stories in which the same line is repeated over and over again. Uvayom kudev kadeti alehem chatatam. In that moment, it was ordained for calamity. And then it gives us a series of stories in the Torah. There's a story about the rape of Dinah, and it concludes, it adds to the impact. That calamity was ordained for the sin of Joseph's brothers for throwing him into a pit. for that day. In that moment, it was ordained as calamity. The best part of this commentary in the Gemara is not even found in the Gemara. There is no comparison. No one ever says in the Gemara, well, the rape of Dinah was worse than Joseph's brothers throwing him into a pit to die, which was worse than the sin of the golden calf. The rabbis don't do comparisons. They just ask, what's the cumulative effect on us? Nowhere do the rabbis say, but what about that sin? It's certainly our reaction when we hear about something tragic or even an amazing achievement. Whether we say the words out loud or not, we often are guilty of comparison. You know that famous joke. A Jewish mother gives her son 2 ties. He goes upstairs, puts one of the ties on. He comes down, and she says, what's the matter? You don't like the other tie? That's what happens when you compare. You don't win, no matter what. From our earliest days, we start out by saying, but Johnny's mother lets him. Beth's dad says it's okay. And you can fill in the blank from allowances to wearing makeup. It codes itself in our DNA, how we see ourselves. We base our successes on comparing our achievements to others. No question that on some level competition is good, because it does challenge us to be better. However, when it is a tool for self-devaluation, for dehumanizing of others, when it keeps us down, when it inhibits us from personal full expression, then we're doing more damage than good. Joey Jaws Chestnut. You know who he is? Oh, I'm so sorry. He is known as the champion, the king of competitive eating. He chomped his way to an unsurprising win on the 4th of July in Coney Island again this year. He took first place for the men's hot dog eating competition. Chestnut's win was his 16th in the Nathan's famous annual contest. He rhythmically devoured 62 hot dogs in 10 minutes. 13 hot dogs more than his next best competitor, adding to his growing number of speed-eating records. The pinnacle of competitive eating in the United States is undoubtedly Nathan's hot dog competition. You know how much he won for it? $10,000. I can't help but think where that $10,000 could have gone in terms of feeding those who are hungry. I can't even imagine where all those hot dogs could have gone to feeding the hungry. There's something obscene about a culture in which eating is a competition when so many people in our country go hungry. I know it's whataboutism, like I've been talking about all night long. But in 2022, 828 million people were facing hunger. 345 million were experiencing acute hunger. And that number keeps growing. That's up from 25% from the previous year. The increase in global hunger now, on some level, is attributed to the war in Ukraine. The Food and Agricultural Organization estimates that there are 2.3 billion people in the world facing extreme and even dangerous levels of food insecurity. That's roughly 29% of the world. Often people come to say to me, and they say, I'm sorry for bothering you with this silly little issue, Rabbi. I know you have much bigger, more important things to deal with. And I always respond in the same way. Let's not compare our issues to other people. Each and every issue that we face is a battle that we are fighting. So don't compare. And don't minimize, and don't let yourself down by putting yourself down. Once we walk through the door of whataboutism, we rob ourselves of living our lives. We rob ourselves of living our lives in concert with what we're supposed to do as ordained by God. Each of us is different, and each of us has a unique set of circumstances in which we have to make it day to day. Don't minimize the challenge that you have. Ask for help, assuming that nobody else will compare as well. In the public discourse over the next year, we're going to hear one attack after another. Some will come in the form of whataboutism. My criminal activity wasn't anywhere near what his was. It's a technique in discussion that intends to discredit the opponent's argument by attacking the opponent's own personal behavior and actions as being inconsistent with their argument. Therefore, whataboutism is really accusing the other of hypocrisy. This special reasoning is a special type of ad hominem attack. And while we ought not stand for it, at least what we can do is turn it off. Just because the leaders of our nation have made their living off doing it, we don't need to buy into it. Just because the candidates devolve into this base and worthless approach to raising themselves up by pushing others down doesn't mean we have to adopt it in our own lives. Every television, radio, social media platform has built into it corrections on vulgar language, vulgar types of speech. All you have to do is turn the knob, change the station, unplug it entirely. Then make a determination yourself not to speak that way. Not to other people in your orbit, not on a social platform, and certainly not to yourself. When we go down this road, we end up at a dead end. So here's just one piece of advice. Just because in the past you've gone down the wrong road doesn't mean you have to keep on going. There's always such a thing as a U-turn. Shana Tova.